Hey everyone, it's Lexi. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you some of my top historical fiction recommendations. So I am a very big World War II historical fiction fan. For a long time before I really got onto booktube, I primarily read murder mysteries and World War II historical fiction. So I feel like I have a good variety of books here. I'm not going to mention The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna or All the Light We Cannot See because I feel like those are very well-known historical fiction that takes place in World War II. So these are kind of backlist, sleeper books. I feel like people are sleeping on these. So these are ones that I think if you love those two books that I talked about, I feel like these ones will be right up your alley. So without further ado, let's get started. So first up, I have kind of a spy World War II book, and it is Dragonfly by Leila Meacham. This is a book that I did a book club with during the pandemic with one of my friends, my lab mates from school. And this one's really interesting. So we follow 5 Americans who are approached by the OSS in 1942, where they are essentially trained to go undercover in Nazi-occupied France during this time. So we get a kind of a dual storyline. We get them when they're training, when they're become friends, when they are in Paris, working undercover as spies, their aliases, all that stuff. But we also get kind of a present day storyline in the 50s where we follow these people after the events of what happened. And one of the people from the group did not make it back. So there is kind of a rumor going around that the person that they thought is dead is perhaps alive. And so we kind of get the kind of 2 stories that are told at the same time. We get the kind of essentially the events leading up to the person's what was thought was their demise, and then we also get these people kind of trying to figure out what is going on. So this one was I was very anxious the entire time because it's something bad is going to happen, and you can see how the threads of their lies are starting to catch up to them. And so I felt incredibly anxious for these characters, and you're just waiting for the ball to drop. You're just waiting for them to be caught. And it made for a really suspenseful read. It had me on the edge of my seat. It was really interesting, and having kind of that undercover kind of spy storyline made something really different from the traditional World War II stories that I read. So this one was really unique, but it was I think if you like World War II historical fiction, which I assume you probably do if you're watching this video, I think this one is a good one to kind of step outside your comfort zone because it has all the classic stuff. It has, Nazi-occupied France. It has kind of the dual storylines that we typically see with a lot of these style of books, but basically it kind of adds that suspense of kind of espionage. So I highly recommend this one. This is one I haven't heard anyone talk about here on BookTube, so I highly recommend this one. So next up, this is one that is based off of a real life person, and it is called Codename Helene by Ariel Lawhon. And this one is, again, kind of where you have 2 storylines. So basically we follow this woman, I'm blanking on her name, Nancy, in 1936, where she is an Australian who is living in Paris, and she ends up falling in love with a Frenchman. So the first I would say the past storyline is her, falling in love, their love story, and how she eventually gets intertwined with the kind of underground resistance movement against the Nazis during the occupation. And so the kind of the present day storyline is we follow her as she becomes kind of very well known within the resistance. She goes by the codename Helene, and she is kind of dispatched to these kind of different revolutionary resistance groups throughout France to kind of help them kind of get the ball rolling with kind of destabilizing the Nazis in the area. So she's become very well known, and so we're kind of getting the 2 storylines of how she eventually gets involved with the resistance, and then what she was kind of known for in real life. So what's interesting too is because this is based off a real person, the author would base a lot of this on, I believe this person's it's a work of fiction, but she took a lot of this person's biography to add that in here. So it's kind of essentially a novelization of what happened. So I think it's really special to have World War II historical fiction that really focuses on women's story, in this case a real, you know, woman who did this stuff. I feel like history always focuses on the men, so you'll see there's a common trend here with a lot of these books kind of focusing on women's and their stories. But it was really interesting to see her bravery, everything that she had to overcome, all of the tremendous amount of loss that she experienced, but how she was still kind of persevering and, you know, wanting to meet the end goal of France being liberated and defeating the Nazis. So it's again really interesting, again, because it has that kind of, not necessarily espionage, but, you know, kind of working with the resistance. There's always that sense of like, when is the ball gonna drop? And I feel like this book does a really good job. And there's like slightly kind of like romance in this one because it does follow like how she falls in love with her husband and all that stuff, but that's kind of like a subplot. It's really much kind of, the book is focusing on Nancy, her story, and her story with the war. This has to be one of my favorite historical fictions of all time, and it is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. This book was, I feel like maybe like over 10 years ago, it was, you know, a lot of people talked about it, but I feel like the hype for this one has really gone down. I don't really hear people talk about this one, but I feel like this is one that I feel like should stand the test of time with how impactful this one. This one is interesting because it's told in two narration styles. Basically the premise of the story is we follow Julie and Maddie, who are kind of best friends, who are part of the, I guess, like, war effort for the US and England during World War II. Julie is kind of a spy that goes undercover in Paris, and then Maddie is someone who flies the plane. So is involved with like the planes. So Julie ends up getting captured by the Nazis in Paris, and they know that there was someone else on board the flight that was downed, which Maddie was flying basically. So they're trying to figure out, where is Maddie? Like, they know there's something going on, and so Julie is forced to kind of write these diary entries, recounting her, you know, who Maddie was to her, you know, where, you know, she is, like, kind of summarizing the events that led to Julie end up getting dropped into Paris, and then also kind of Maddie's involvement in it as well. And then we get a, you know, switch in perspective where we get Maddie's story, which is more of a kind of standard narration style that you typically see. Sorry about that. I used my computer to see what is on my phone, and it got disconnected. But basically the main kind of draw of the story is the friendship and love that is shared between Maddie and Julie. A lot of it is their friendship, their love for each other, their drive to save and protect each other is really, you know, and it ultimately is like very heartbreaking. Like, there's a few quotes in here that I like have like underlined, and it moved me so much that I even put like a flower from when one of my grandma's funeral in here as well, because I felt like it really kind of summarized grief really well. So like I keep that in here, and that's just really much a testament of how impactful I found this book to be. It is YA, but I feel like it doesn't read YA. Like, I think it could still be interpreted as like an adult book with how dark the subject matter is, but I think because these girls are a little bit younger, it's classified as YA. But I would say, like, I have a hard time reading YA. I had a hard time, like, I never was really into YA when I was reading this, but this is one that really like doesn't read like that. It reads for a very mature audience, and this is a book that like has really stuck with me. Next, I have The Storyteller by Jodi Picoult. This book, like, I remember just being totally obsessed with this. It was around the time, like, I read The Nightingale, I read this one, I read Codename Verity. Like, that was, like, peak World War II historical fiction, like, reading time. But this one is really interesting. This one follows a woman named Sage who works at a bakery, and she attends a grief kind of support group. And one day, this elderly man who's in her support group comes to her bakery and starts talking to her, and then they form a really good friendship, and then he confesses something to her, and then majority of this book is him talking about like a betrayal that happened during World War II and his confession to what he did during the war. This book was incredibly atmospheric. The way, like, I felt like I was living this, the way everything is described, like, it's very sensory heavy. Like, I could, you know, you know, taste the bread that she's describing, I could smell the concentration camps. Like I could really kind of put myself in these characters' shoes in such a like a visceral way. Like you're just totally engrossed in the story. I think it's best to kind of not know too much about kind of the historical fiction like World War II plot in this one. I think it's just best to kind of dive in, but it was incredibly heartbreaking. The writing was so, like I said, it was so engrossing. It was very visceral, and like I think especially when you're dealing with such dark and horrendous subject matter, it's very important to kind of have the writing to really captures that. Like I felt like I was there. I felt like I had the fear of these characters. My heart was racing for them. And again, I think it's best to kind of go in not knowing too much else about it, but just know this one is a very kind of immersive reading experience. And lastly, I have Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. This is kind of the first book in a companion series. So this one takes place in World War II. The next one takes place in World War I, and then the last one takes place during the Civil War, and it follows the Faraday, women of the Faraday family and their ancestors in each of these kind of major war events, but they're based off of real women. This book has kind of 3 different perspectives. We follow Caroline Faraday, who was an actual woman, and it's like, again, a novelization of, you know, her experience during the war, but she is kind of a New York socialite. The war is going on in Europe, and she wants to feel like she has a purpose, so she ends up kind of getting involved. Like there's a tie or a connection that I don't want to mention, but she gets connected to these 2 other characters. We follow then 2 other characters. One is a German woman who is a Nazi working at the concentration camps. She is a doctor, and she's the one who are like doing the experiments on, you know, their prisoners at like Ravensbrück. A lot of the kind of medical testing, the horrendous medical testing that was done, she was one of the doctors behind it. And then we also have this young woman who gets captured and sent to a concentration camp, and is one of the rabbits, as they were called, at Ravensbrück, which are the kind of the women that were like tested on. So we obviously know how the prisoner and the doctor's narratives are connected, but we don't. Caroline kind of finds her way in here with this one. So again, this one was, there's something really capturing about this writer's writing style. I remember like reading this, and like I would, you know, sit down and read and look up and be like, oh my god, I already read 50 pages. I was just really encaptured by the story and her writing style and the characters. I think because we have these 3 different perspectives, I feel like a lot of concerns are with these kind of multiple POV storylines is that it makes the overall narrative feel very disjointed, but that was not the case. I felt like for each character and their chapter, it was ultimately to move the plot along to what eventually kind of is the grand finale with this book. And so it was really just, again, such a, you know, a beautifully written story. Even though it deals with dark subject matter, I think it really does highlight some of the kind of, you know, human resilience and friendship and kind of the really kind of good aspects of humankind that come out of these like very dark times. And I think it's really good to, and it's important to highlight kind of the light with the dark in this case. So again, this one is one of my favorites. And this one is World War II is like Caroline Faraday, and then the World War I, I think is her grandmother. And then the Civil War one is like, I think like great aunts or something. Like it's something, but it does follow, and it's, you know, actually based on these women's, you know, stories. So if you do like this writing, there are other ones like within a World War II historical, or again in historical fiction kind of storytelling, you know, for different kind of eras in war. But this one is really, again, all of these are heartbreaking, but it is definitely one that stands out to me. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite World War II historical fiction recommendations are and all of that fun stuff. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.